If you want to climb in Season 5, then you need to know these 3 tips for every single role: tank, DPS, and support. Understanding other roles and how to play them is going to make you even better on your mains, so we're going to break down tips on all of them, and of course there'll be timestamps in the description down below. But first, a word from our sponsor. Now, I have a ton of friends who are constantly smoking and vaping, and they desperately want to move away from those habits, but they just can't. That's why I'm really excited to introduce the sponsor of this video, Fume. Fume isn't a vape and it's not an e-cig. There's no smoke or vapor involved. It's a flavor air device that uses natural food grade ingredients to give you something satisfying to reach for without any nicotine or chemicals. You can draw it through with your mouth and that's it. Simple, clean, and portable. Now, honestly, I was really impressed with the design of the thing. It feels really solid and well made, and the flavors are actually good. My personal favorite being the crisp mint, super refreshing, clean, and it's more like a herbal tea than anything sugary or intense, but there's a ton of different flavors and options that you can look at. Now, over 700,000 people have added Fume to their daily routine, and it makes sense. It's a simple alternative that gives you something better to reach for in those automatic moments. And right now, if you order the Journey Pack using my code CoachMills, you'll get a free Fume topper with your order. Just go to tryfume.com/CoachMills or scan the QR code on the screen or check in the link down below. And once again, thanks to Fume for sponsoring this video. Now, the first role we got to talk about is tanking, and there's a lot of mistakes that people are making on tanks and certain things tank players are not doing that prevents them from carrying, just basically being a victim to their teammates. Now, the first thing we got to talk about is main tanking versus off tanking. So we all know that a tank's job is to create space and occupy space, the areas, angle, and positions on a map that you want to control as a team. Tanks need to contest that and occupy that. But what is the actual difference between a main tank and an off tank, and how does that affect your gameplay? So in general, a main tank is going to take on many of the major responsibilities that a tank has around objectives and core areas. This means that he could be playing frontline, or he could be playing towards the cart or around the cart, contesting a certain objective so the point doesn't flip in CoF. He has extra responsibilities as the main tank, and typically it's a tank that has the means to protect himself in some way. Think like a Magneto with a bubble and a shield, or a Strange. Even Emma can be a main tank depending on the composition. And if you're a solo tank, then you always have all the jobs or responsibilities of a main tank, right? If the point's about to flip, you do not want your Luna Snow to run out and contest it. Tanks are the ones that do these responsibilities because they're the ones that can survive through these responsibilities. Now, if that's what a main tank is, what is an off tank? So when you're playing 2 tanks, I know, weird concept, but when you're playing 2 tanks, the idea is an off tank does other things to create advantage that isn't based around just holding and contesting neutral space. Oftentimes, they will dive the enemy team. They will challenge individual DPS on off angles. They will go and mark a diver, which means specifically targeting that diver. They can do a variety of different things. They're super flexible in what they do, and one of the things that kind of defines a lot of them is that in 1v1s they have a pretty huge advantage. In a 1v1, Thor wins a lot. Venom wins a lot of true 1v1s. Because they have such massive health totals and reasonable damage, they're not going to lose 1v1s, and typically they can take a lot of damage and still get out of danger. But of course, they can still be susceptible to like getting mass CC'd or whatever the case may be. But here's the thing. Off tanks still need to do the jobs of main tanks, and main tanks can still do the job of off tanks. I want you to consider it more like a spectrum. And what I mean by that is that every single type of player, if you walk out, even as a solo tank mag or whatever you are, you can do off tanky things. You can mark a diver, you can peel, you can get a kill, you can push somebody, but you still need to do your main job. And that's the important thing about learning the difference between main and off tank, is that there are going to be times when you're more freed up as a tank to do various things depending on what the objective's at, how the team fight is playing, what's the win condition of the fight. Like if your whole team's getting jumped by 3 people, the objective does not matter. If you go and try to push the objective and your entire team dies and you didn't interrupt that or you weren't a part of that in any way, it literally doesn't matter that you did the quote-unquote jobs of a main tank, right? Hey, I stayed frontline. Well, hey, great. We all died in the backline, right? So there are still responsibilities that you can take on depending on the situation, but those change depending on the context of the fight. You know, OT, very specific situations, you need to be the one to anchor. You need to be the one that is contesting the objectives. You need to be the one that allow your teammates, your DPS and supports, to play flexible positions because you can can stay on objectives in the middle of a fight and not just fall over and die, right? And another part of this is that when you have another tank to take on some of these responsibilities, then both of you get to be more free. And what I mean by that is, if you're a solo Strange, you might play very front to back. You're not necessarily chasing people around. You're not marking DPS. You're not chasing the hell in the high ground. You're probably playing more safe, and you're making sure that you're applying pressure on the front line and contesting objectives and doing all this main tank important stuff, responsibilities that you're supposed to do. And there will be occasional times where you can go for a play here and there and mark here and there, but you're not going to do it all that much. But the second you get a Emma or a Magneto to play alongside you, now y'all can share that load. Some of y'all do it sometimes and some of y'all do it other times, and it allows for both of y'all to be truly free and truly flexible, a lot more flexible. Now, really, if you're like in a solo tank situation, like let's say you're solo tank mag, the trick is to find moments in which you can kind of ignore your responsibilities and go for a play and then go back to your responsibilities. This could mean I'm playing frontline, I see my team getting dove in the back line, I go and I try to alternate fire the BP, I bubble the person that's dove, and then boom, I'm back to the objective, I'm back to applying pressure, I'm back to contesting space and taking space. I helped in the way that I can help, and then I'm back in the way that I need to be back. So that's just one example, but you're just trying to do the most playing in the lines between responsibilities and playmaking at all times on tank if you want to truly carry. Now for the next tip, we're going to talk about how to actually carry on tank depending on the elo you're in. In low elo, the lowest of elos, let's say bronze and silver, and maybe the bottom of gold, I would highly recommend not caring so much about your team composition and playing tank to get value and survive. While there are responsibilities that you still need to do as a tank, those responsibilities matter less when no one's really doing what they're supposed to do. Everyone's just kind of playing deathmatch and people are dying all around you randomly. Yeah, you could play Magneto front to back and do everything perfectly, and no one is going to care. Everyone's just going to die. There's going to be a Daredevil killing 3 people in your back line. But if you play maybe more aggressive as Mag and get kills, play to actually frag out and trade out, or you play something like Thor, which I highly recommend in the lower elos, where you can literally just get a ton of kills, that is going to win you games. Like if you go 20-2 on Thor, it doesn't matter. For one, there's a lot of performance bonuses, so even if you lose that game, you're not going to lose that much. And for two, the game is far more deathmatch oriented. So trying to play super fundamental and do everything perfectly on tank is kind of setting you up for failure when, once again, no one is doing their job properly. Now, once you get to the mid elo, this is where things start to play more normal. You know, the plats, the diamonds, this is where, you know, the game is kind of emulating the higher elos. And in this elo, you can pretty much play whatever you want to play. You just have to do it well. You just have to think about all the things we talked about between main and off tank. Think about how you're getting value, try to get low deaths, think about your responsibilities, and most importantly, don't allow enemies to hold positions that give kill potential on your team for free. So if a Hela plays the high ground and you could poke her out, don't let her sit up there, because if she sits up there for too long, she's going to kill one of your teammates. If someone takes an off angle on you, try to poke that person out. Try to contest that space. Don't allow people to go where they want to go for free. Make it under pressure. Make everything under pressure, but don't put so much pressure on them that you put yourself at risk, right? You're at the core goal is to not die as little as possible, but then the secondary goal is to try to pressure out these positions and just not let them play these angles for free. Really, really important. And then in high elo, of course, is going to be completely different, and this is where you just need to minimize your mistakes. If you're trying to carry on tank in high elo, there's a lot of things that you're probably doing right. You're hitting big Strange ults, you're hitting a crazy Mag ult, you're diving in on Venom, and you're properly cycling out. It's not really about the highs here, it's about the lows. It's about how many mistakes are you making in a game? How many errors are you making? Is there a play that didn't go right that you could have done better? And that's the best thing you could do. Self-evaluate, VOD review. If you go into a play and you messed up your Venom ults, or maybe you pushed when you should have backed away and you didn't really realize it in the moment. VOD reviewing and trying to slowly eliminate your mistakes, going from 15 mistakes a game to 10 to 5, that's how you really start to differentiate yourself between other high elo players and start to become an actual carry tank. And the last tip, but certainly not least, is about creating optimal team composition. So Should you change your playstyle based on that comp? We did talk about main versus off tank. If you are a solo tank, you have to operate within the confines of your responsibilities. You're going to look for plays here and there, but understand that once you die as a solo tank, it's very difficult for your team to win the fight. Like, it's just very, very hard. In a 2v2, 2 DPS versus a tank and a support, unless those DPS can bum rush and kill that support immediately, they lose. Because tanks just have constant resource pool. That HP pool is just you know, so much larger than the DPS, gives them attrition, gives them sustain. So what this really means is that in situations where you could push forward, you never want to trade. You never want to sacrifice your life to kill a support. That's typically very bad when you're solo tanking. Your life is extremely valuable, more so than it normally is. So like I said, operate within the confines of your responsibility, but still look for plays, but balance the risk. And I know that this is all hard, but that's kind of the trick if you want to get better at tank. Now, when you're creating a team composition, think about what your tanks are doing and how to best enable them. So one of my favorite compositions right now, a very strong ranked duo composition, is Angela Thor as a duo tank composition. Two tanks that people don't really think of as main or off tanks, but they can still do the responsibility, or they share the responsibilities of contesting objectives. But most importantly, they can kill people and you know, pull people out of position and get picks, and that's a great way to take space, is just killing the enemy team. But one of the things about these two tanks is that they have a hard time getting resources from their backline if their backline has to play too far back, and they are not playing frontline themselves because they typically want to dive and make some more proactive plays. So what does this mean? Backline supports like Jeff and Rocket are going to be the best for a composition like this. Supports that can operate from multiple angles, can heal from range, can help these players deal damage and heal even when they're in the fight. That could be a very powerful composition. Something like Angela combined with a Thor, combined with Jeff, combined with Rocket, combined with like mobility DPS, Psylocke, Star-Lord, whatever. And the same logic like kind of applies to Caps and Venoms. Supports that can help and aid them while they're in the fight is extremely strong. But if you're playing something more front to back, you know, with a very solid front line, then supports that benefit from that super solid front line like Luna can be really, really strong. Although Luna can be a bit flexible because of her snowflake, she can still play safe and enable a hybrid comp where she's kind of healing her front line, but still healing a diver from range. So there is some flexibility there. But think about how your comp needs heals, and it can help you build a better composition. Another thing to think about is how much heals does your comp needs. If you're a solo tank, right, like just a solo tank Mag or solo tank Emma, you're probably not going to take that much damage. You don't have to take that much damage. So what does this mean? You could probably run 2 supports Adam Luna with the team up. You could run 2 supports, one of them being Mantis. You can get away with that because there's just not a constant like hole of healing that needs to be filled. But if you're rocking, I don't know, Thing Groot for some reason, yeah, that Mantis heal is not going to be enough, man. You're going to fall over. And in fact, you know, you really need a lot of heals. You're greedy. You're so greedy for heals. But if you're Groot in a good group, triple heals, you can really take advantage of that. So understanding how much resources certain tanks need can help you build or pick better tanks for the situation. Now, I gotta move on to DPS, and there is a lot of tips that you need to incorporate in your gameplay if you want to level up your DPS game and climb the ladder with ease. Number 1 is plays that matter. These are the most important things. If you want to be a DPS player that wins games, this is what you got to do. Number 1 is take angles. A lot of DPS players will fight main. They'll stand with their team, they'll shoot with their team, and there are certain characters that can do this. Certain characters like Punisher and Bucky, they're fine, but a lot of the times you want to take a slight angle on the enemy. If your team is fighting them from the front, you want to fight them from like a 45-degree angle or more. And the reason is because the enemy can't hide behind you both. Having multiple angles puts pressure from an angle that they can't hide behind. Like if I'm hiding behind a piece of cover, I can't hide behind a cover that protects me from every angle, right? Unless I'm like in a room somewhere. So that's what angles does. It pressures from multiple angles. They take damage from the front, they back up, now they're taking damage from the side. Otherwise, if you're all standing main, you do damage to them from the front, Now they're off to the side. No one can see them, right? And also, angles threaten a lot. They threaten damage. They threaten a flank. They threaten pressure. So there's a lot of things that it represents that puts additional pressure on the enemy that means that it gives you options as well. You know, if they're weak, if your team gets a pick, if they start backing up, you can push in, take a tighter angle, and close in that gap and kind of cut them off. They don't have an exit route, right? Another really powerful thing is forcing ultimates. There are a lot of really strong defensive ultimates, and if you're a DPS player that can force ults with your play or even with your ultimate, and if you do it early enough, then your opponents can't utilize that ult to win the fight. So what do I mean by that? If your goal as Psylocke is to win the fight with your ultimate, trying to push the enemy team, pressure the Luna, put her in a situation where she will die. Maybe you're waiting for your moment, waiting for her to take pressure, waiting for her to have wasted clap, whatever it is. And then you really all in her, try to bait out that support ult. You baited it out, you cleared the way for your own ult. Or maybe you ult her really early. You put a lot of pressure on her early. You pop your ultimate really, really early, like way, way, way before their team gets to your team. She has to pop ult then. You get out, you regroup. She walks the Luna ult all the way to your team. By the time she gets there, the Luna ult's just about to end or it ends. What that means is that she didn't get to use the Luna ult. Her team didn't get to use the Luna ult to walk through your team. And now when your team rocket ults or your team uses any other defensive ult, now they can't leverage that Luna ult to trade with it favorably anymore. So that's super, super strong. And it typically allows you to win the neutral. And a lot of DPS won't do this. They kind of don't even really think about what ults are coming up. And they don't even think about, okay, how do I force that support to do what I want them to do? How do I make it so that they press Q? How can I do that? What can I do? How can I play? How can I make them kind of dance to my tune? What do I do? And there's a lot of tools that every DPS has to force that. And if you force it, remember that, like, if you go in with Iron Fist ult and you force that ult, just dip out right away. Don't stay in. Don't risk. You got the value. Dip out, reset, wait for things to settle down, then re-engage. Or wait for your teammates to ultimate, because now your supports have ultimate advantage and you can engage off of that. Think about how the fight plays out when these ultimates are live as well, and who has the advantage in any given fight. It will tell you whether to back up or whether you're at an advantage and you can push forward and yours will last longer. Now, the third part of this is deny enemy ults. This is a really, really important one, and it's one that I think a lot of DPS players don't do enough, and it's knowing when an enemy DPS has a really important ult. Whether it's a Starlet ult, a Psylocke ult, a Storm ult, a Bucky ult, whatever. And maybe it's a Punisher ult. I think the most common one that you should do is Punisher ult. Let's say you have a Magneto, or like you played first fight, they had a Punisher, and the Punisher like killed your team, and then y'all swapped to Magneto. And the second fight's coming up, and you're Psylocke, and you see the second fight, or you're Bucky, or whoever, and your Magneto's at 60% ult, 70% ult, and you know that Punisher has ult, or he's about to get it. Understanding that if that Punisher ults, y'all have no answer. You do not have your Mag ult yet. You do not have a way to counter it. You do not have a way to shut it down. So what does that mean? The entire rest of the fight's game plan is focus the Punisher. Shoot him, flank him, target him, catch him out of position. He's thinking, he dies out of nowhere, and he's going to think, wow, they really focused me. But what you did is if you get a pick on him, you created that delay, that gap that your Magneto needed to build up his ultimate so that he's on pace to shut down that Punisher. And if you don't do that, the Punisher's going to ult. Your Magneto's going to look at like his 85% ult, not being able to do anything. Your entire team's going to lose, and you're going to lose the point. So it's extremely important to identify what's their win conditions. And you can make it really awkward for a Star-Lord to ult, for a Psylocke to get into the perfect position, forcing her and Viz out early, forcing her dashes out early, force her to fight you, force situations that are awkward for these other DPS. The Bucky doesn't really want to fight you if he has his ultimate and he's ready to go. And maybe you're trying to bait him. You're trying to get him to try to ult you solo so that you can dodge out of the way, make him waste his ult, kill him. This is really, really important, and it's something that you can do to get massive advantage and have their teammates being like, are you really going to hold ult all game? Now, the second thing you need to think about on DPS is what is your role? So when you're playing DPS, you need to be changing your play style depending on the situation. And I think there's three main play styles. There's number one is poke, where you're doing long distance damage. You typically want to take off angles, and you typically want to be poking from these deep off angles that shift depending on advantage, disadvantage, where the enemy team is positioned, and things like that. And, you know, once again, the 45-degree angle or deeper from your team's angle. Now, there's dive, where you're actively diving their backline and you're jumping their backline and you're trying to kill their backline supports over and over again. And this could be super powerful, but depending on their backline, it's going to be harder or easier. And depending on your team, it's going to be harder or easier. Like if you have a Venom coming with you as Black Panther and there's a Psylocke poking, it's going to be really easy to kind of bust through their backline. But if they're, you know, playing a full dive, let's say you're playing like Magneto, I don't know, Magneto, Emma, Luna, just a normal front to back composition, and you're on Psylocke, and they're playing a Venom, Cap, Psy, something like that. Venom, Cap, Psy, Venom, Cap, Daredevil, Venom, Cap, some divers, right? Now, you normally, in a normal game, you go to the backline and you go and flank them and you go try to kill their backline, but you know that your entire team's going to get jumped. Your entire team's going to get jumped by an all-in dive. And their dive is going to be stronger than yours. Their dive is going to be super hard hitting because they have a lot of divers. So what does that mean you do? You mark. You find the enemy Psylocke, the enemy diver. You force them to fight you, or you force their cooldowns early. What does that do? It creates a separation. The Venom goes in by himself. Now the Cap goes in later. The Psylocke finally shows up, and the Cap and Venom are already gone because you forced the engagement. Understanding that the Psylocke shouldn't just play the same way every time. Sometimes you're diving in. Sometimes you're being hyper aggressive. Sometimes you're marking. Sometimes you're denying a poker. Sometimes you're marking a diver. It depends on what the enemy's trying to do and where you can place yourself to mess that up, or where can you put yourself to get a lot of free value. That's where you really need to think about. Now, of course, at the end of the day, the most important thing on DPS is to be effective with low deaths. I cannot stress this enough. DPS is the role of risk. You have a ton of risk on DPS. When you're going for an aggressive angle or an aggressive play, you could get marked, you could get chased down, you could get shot, and there is risk inherently involved. But you need to operate within a reasonable amount of risk. Like, DPS players will typically have the most amount of deaths, but it can't be overwhelmingly the most amount of deaths. And your goal should be to have the least amount of deaths out of all other DPS characters in the entire lobby. And that's really the goal. If you have less deaths on average, you're going to be more effective. You can't do anything if you're dead, right? You can't do anything from the spawn room. So it's one of the most important things. Value your life, play natural cover, go from cover to cover, and most importantly, evaluate your risk when you're making a lot of these plays. Now, the last part of this is consistent ult value, and I think this is where a lot of DPS players kind of lag behind, where they'll have some ults that get 5 people and then other ults that get 0 and they die. I mean, that happens a lot. I think Bucky players can understand this, Black Panther players can understand this, and the trick is to find consistent ways to get value in your ultimate that lead to a team fight win. What is the consistent way? And it's different for every single DPS character. How do you clear the way? What do? We talked about forcing enemy defensive ults. We talked about denying certain ults. How do you clear that way so that you can guarantee get value with your ultimate? If you're Star-Lord, there's a lot to think about. You got to think about Soul Bond. You got to think about defensive ults. You got to think about Magneto ults. But if you think about these things and you pave the way, your ultimate will be a way to get consistent value every single fight. And most of the time, when you're ulting and not getting any value, it's because there's something you didn't even think about. While DPS is definitely a super mechanical role, whether an ultimate is successful or not almost purely comes down to game sense. There are going to be some ults that have a lot of mechanics involved, but when you press your Q or press your ultimate is more important than how you use it the vast majority of the time. You fly in as Spider-Man into the enemy team, and they're all grouped up together, and you press ult before your team is even, out of spawn, and you die. That is bad timing. But let's say your team is in, they're applying pressure, cooldowns are being traded, there's so much going on, and now the Spider-Man comes and presses ult. That's too many things to deal with. There's too many problems to deal with. The cooldowns are low, they're not ready for you, you're gonna get value. It's about timing. Also, one of the things I'll say is that you should try to go for consistent ultimates rather than crazy high risk, high value ultimates. I think one of the best things you could do as Bucky is get that first kill guaranteed. How do you get that first kill guaranteed? You shoot at this mag, shoot at this mag. He uses shield, he uses bubble. You time your hook after his bubble and shield drop. You pull him into your team, you 180. You pop your ult and you ult him. Boom, you got the first reset. They could pop a Luna ult, they could pop a rocket ult, they could pop whatever. You got the first kill. Play for consistency first, then we can experiment from there. But try to get guaranteed value every single ult. I would rather all your ults to be 1s and 2s on the value scale rather than 0s and 3s or 0s and 4s. Now last but certainly not least, we gotta talk about supports. And you support players are doing a lot of things right, but some really important things wrong. You gotta understand that as a support, your ultimates are extremely powerful for the most part. I think across the board, the support role has very powerful ultimates, especially due to their power and defensive capabilities. And the reason is because, like, as an example, a Luna ult can deny an ultimate that is being used, right? Something like a Bucky ult tries to get used and the Luna ult denies it, but then the rest of the Luna ults can be used to win the fight or force out another ult. Because it denied the first ult, maybe got you a kill, and then you get to use it to press the enemy team, to force out a defensive ult, and you forced an ult, you baited an ult. Like, there's a lot you're doing with one ultimate. It's very, very powerful. Now, you know what they say, with great power comes great responsibility, and we're not talking about the 0-10 at Spider-Man, we're talking about you dying pre-fight. And the reason that that is so bad is because there's a lot of situations where in a fight that is playing out in like a real way, you know, not chaos, but a fight that's playing out in a real way, one ult trades for another ult, trades for another ult, trades for another ult, right? And most of the time, you need the ults to trade for each other because there's gonna be no-win situations. Either they're popping an ultimate and y'all don't have one to respond, they're popping like a defensive ultimate walking on you, a Starlight ultimate shooting you from above. Understand that you dying pre-fight means that you're probably gonna lose a team fight. Even if for some reason you manage to res or get back or whatever the case may be, you're gonna be off tempo on ults, you're gonna be behind, and you could lose the fight because of it. So what does that actually mean? It means that your life is the most valuable. And of course, everyone else should know that. Your tanks and DPS should as well, and they should peel for you. I know that that's a really weird term that DPS and tanks don't really do, but they should. But you need to try to position in the best place possible so that you are not getting killed pre-fight or first in fight ever. It's one of the most important things because, like I said, you being alive can change the entire fight. If you're not alive, you basically lose the fight on the spot. And fights can be delayed and drawn out from defensive ults, giving your team time to regroup and teleport back or respawn or whatever the case may be in a way that, you know, a DPS alone isn't going to be able to stall cart until the supports get back. It doesn't really matter what ult they got unless you're like Iron Fist and you're a goat. Now, what does that actually mean, not dying pre-fight? Now, there's going to be some deaths that are unavoidable, especially if your team doesn't help you at all. There's like 3 people jumping you simultaneously, but it really comes down to identifying your threats, like knowing where they are. If there's a diver, know he's routing to the left. Push yourself to the right. Rotate clockwise to him. Not peek certain angles and respect angles of damage dealers. And most importantly, don't put yourself in unnecessary risk, even if it means your teammates are gonna die. Like, I think this is the biggest one and probably the most frustrating one for support players, is that they see their DPS out of position in critical or their tank out of position in critical, and they know that if they peek out to heal them or pocket heal them, they are under risk. And you can kind of play within the lines there. But a lot of the time, you need to play with your life being the most important, because it legitimately is the most important. And maybe that means that your DPS player feeds and dies. He should have died. Like, he's out of position. Maybe that means your tank player that was way in their spawn is dead. Yeah, he probably should have had a way to get out and should have left the fight. But if you allow yourself to kind of use the bad mistakes of all your teammates to put yourself in a position where you're dying constantly, then the loss turns back to being on you. And the thing that you need to understand is that you can have really, really bad and inting DPS and tanks, but if you are just holding it down and playing really solid and not dying a lot as a support, you can carry them. Now, they're not going to recognize that you carried them, but you 100% did, because you were the one that understood what the fight was about. You understood the win condition, you understood the value of your life, and you selectively decided who lives and who dies. And I really mean that, where you gauge the risk. You understand that there are certain players that you're not going to be able to save at all times, and there's certain things that you're not going to be able to do, so you don't try and get yourself killed in the process. Now, the other thing about ultimates is understand the difference between a tempo ult and a max value ultimate. So let's say you're in a team fight and for whatever reason you have a Groot that's taking 1,000,000 damage and you're rocking. And you're charging and charging and charging and you build up your ult really quickly. And you know, based on how damage was traded, that you have ultimate before both their other supports. You can ult for tempo. And that means that you fire the ult right away. You use it and leverage it to push forward, get kills, swarm the enemy supports. But if you misevaluate that and you're saying, okay, I'm going to pop my ult early. You pop the ult, your team pushes forward, they pop a Luna ult, they get to kill your rocket ult, and now they get to walk y'all back down. And maybe they walk y'all back down into baiting out your other ult, and they got 2 ults for the price of 1. Now, the reason that that trade happened like that is because you assumed that y'all were above an ultimate charge, but you really weren't. So it's really important to understand when you're above or below, because here's the thing. If y'all both have ults at the same time in a more slow attrition-y fight, what you really want to have ults for is to answer things that happen on a battlefield. So first scenario, tempo. I'm ahead. I'm gonna, take this little advantage I have, this ultimate advantage I have, and leverage it into team fight wins before you even get a chance to get your tools online, your ultimates online. That's number 1. That's tempo. Number 2 is I need my ultimate to be used in response to certain ults that are being used, a Star-Lord ult, a Psylocke ult, a Bucky ult, a Groot ult, or whatever. Or I need to use my ultimate last. I want to be the last ultimate standing. If they pop Luna, let's say 2 Lunas, I want them to pop Luna ults before I pop Luna ults, because I want my Luna ult to last longer on the back end. So you're playing for max value. So you see it's different here. In one situation, you're playing for tempo, and in one situation, you're playing for value. And you need to kind of read the pace of the fight. In certain fights, you are going to be able to build an ult incredibly quickly and understand I'm ahead of everyone here because I'm hitting all my shots. I'm getting a crazy amount of healing. I'm really pumping everyone full of heals. That's a time you can be super tempo forward, but there's a lot of situations where you really want to slow things down. You don't want to just cloak ult in the neutral and allow the enemy to back up and kite you and then use their ultimate at the very end when they're about to die, when your cloak ult's about to end, and then you just didn't really get a lot of value with it. Understand the difference, and it's going to make you so much better of a support. And number 2 that's super important as a support is the places that you can get value besides healing. While healing is a way that you can get a lot of value on a support, there's tons of ways that you can get value outside of healing, and it comes to a couple of these things. Number 1, enabling angles and plays. So we talked about DPS taking these angles. Finding ways to enable them. You can go with them, you could damage boost them, you can, challenge the angle together. I think like Mantis and Hela holding an off angle, really, really strong because they're really hard to get off that angle. They provide extra damage and a lot of extra pressure. And here's something that's really important. The more pressure your team puts out, typically the less healing they need because the less damage they're taking in return. Because when the enemy team's taking a lot of damage, they can't do as much damage because they're hiding and they're behind cover more, right? So you're enabling that. Another thing you could do is enable plays. Like, enable your Bucky that's going in. Give him damage boost while he's midair. Heal him, pocket him, clap with him. Soul bond his slam. That's just an example. But the idea is that you're trying to double down on what your DPS are doing and help them make their plays better. And there's a lot of times where a DPS would make a play, and if no one would help him, he would just feed and die. And maybe like the past 4 plays in a row, he would have fed and died. But because supports helped him, he kills like 3 people on the enemy team or 2 people on the enemy team. Y'all win the fight. He's thinking he's insane, but the reality is you enabled him. You turned him from an average player into an amazing player because you're enabling the plays he's making. You're kind of putting yourself in those shoes, the mind of the DPS player, and trying to double down on what they're trying to do, enable them, give them sustain, and amplify that play. The third thing is you can do damage yourself, and you would be surprised how much damage you could do yourself on a support, especially if you build mechanical competency. I don't exactly know what it is, but this is true for tank players as well, where people that are not really that into growing their mechanical skill flock to these roles. Support, tank, all the people that are really crazy about getting better aim always play DPS, right? But the reality is great aimers on the support role freaking carry games, period. Mantis needs insane aim. Luna needs insane aim. And if you have insane aim, you're hitting your freezes, you're hitting your shots, you're clapping across the map, you're carrying. Like Ultron, insane aim. Jeff actually has a really high mechanical skill ceiling, really high skill ceiling in general, decision-making tree skill ceiling. Like, understand that if you put time and effort into becoming better mechanically, you're gonna be able to pull off things and outplay people over and over again in your games. Like, I think if like a Bucky and a Luna are like mid-range and they're of similar skill mechanically, like the Bucky's gonna win. But if the Luna is like 5 or 10% mechanically better than that Bucky, she will legitimately win the 1v1 every single time. I'm not even capping. That's the difference. And that's why mechanics are so important. And if you play any of those characters I talked about, like Adam, Ultron, Mantis, Luna, you need to take your mechanical practice seriously. Get better mechanically and take pride in completely dunking on the flanking Black Panther or the Bucky that's trying to 1v1 you. Take pride in that, because that shit is cool. Now, the last thing I'll tell you for support is to create a versatile hero pool. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions about support is that you can just kind of, play a certain support backline no matter what. And that's it. You're good. I'm playing Invis. I play Invis in every single situation. But understand that just like how there are good and bad DPS for certain situations and good and bad takes for certain situations, there are good and bad in supports for certain situations. Like Invisible Woman, her weakness, she doesn't have very long range healing. So she's not the greatest support to enable dive tanks a lot of times. She's not going to be able to push in damage or heals when her Venom's in or her Cap's in. She's not going to be able to do that like a Jeff can, like a Rocket can. So there are going to be certain characters that are going to be better or worse in different situations. Understand that if your entire team's like a hypermobility dive composition, they're like Black Panther, Venom, Cap, and like, Spider-Man or something. None of those characters really want to peel, and you don't really want them to peel you as a support because they're gonna go fuck shit up in the backline, right? And you can play a support that can enable them, but you also want to play a support that survives. And if you're playing something that kind of just sits in the back and just doesn't really have a way to defend yourself and just heals, and you're getting jumped by like 2 people on the enemy team over and over again and dying, you could say, hey, y'all need to peel me more. And your team might listen. They probably won't, but they might listen. But I'm telling you that even if they listen, you're probably going to lose that game because those characters don't have great peeling tools. The Venom doesn't have great peeling tools. The Cap doesn't have great peeling tools. The Spider-Man doesn't have great peeling tools. These characters don't really peel. You want them in their backline, and you want to trade out backlines. So what does that mean? You play a more survivable support. Someone that you could stay alive with, and you need less peeling. And the game, the way that you win that game is by needing less. If you need less in that game, then your team will do more and you'll win. But if you force your team to play characters they don't play because you're getting dove, or you force your team to constantly peel you nonstop, you might lose the game because they're not playing to their strengths. Now, I'm not saying you absolutely have to swap for your team at all times. Like, there's people that swap and don't swap and flex and don't flex. I'm just saying that it's something you could do. If you're like, screw it, I'm just gonna play my best character, I don't have a problem with that, but just understand that that is something you can do. And in the same way that other roles can be flexible, so can supports, and there are good and bad supports for every situation, even though like a lot of people just think, oh yeah, we could play Luna in every situation, we could play Invis in every situation. That's not true. That's really not true. And there are situations where they're good and bad in. Now, I also, in a similar way I talked about with tanking, I want you to think about what your team composition needs. Like, you could probably get away with playing that Adam, that Ultron, the second support, that Mantis second support, when you got a solo tank, Mag, or maybe you got Strange Mag, or Mag Emma, some composition that's not going to trade a ton of damage. Strange does take a lot of damage, so maybe not Strange, but just comps that don't trade a lot of damage. But the second you have that Groot in there, or that thing in there, or just characters that are going to trade a lot, that Venom that needs to be topped up to full the second he gets out of the fight, you're not going to really cut it with just that secondary off heal. Now, you can still win if you're literally just fragging out and frying, and if you're like a mechanical goat because you listen to tip number 2 in this video on support, then by all means, just frag out, apply a ton of pressure, it doesn't even matter, you'll win the game that way. But you are creating a lot of friction in your composition, and understand that you could just lose a game because of that friction. And a lot of times people do lose games because of frictions they don't understand. A combination of some peel, some dive, supports that don't enable dive characters, non-peelers that are, not peeling for their supports that need peel. So, there's just like a lot of anti-synergies that happen that typically create a lot of these roll or B-roll situations that we want to avoid. But I did talk about a lot of different things in this video, and if you have any questions or clarifications, definitely let me know in the comments down below. I want each and every one of you to dominate in Season 5. But if you enjoyed the video, smash that like and subscribe, and let me know down below what video you want to see next. And if you're looking to kick the bad habit, definitely check out Fume in the links down below.